From the moment she could remember, music had always been her companion. The soft hum of the piano in her small home filled the spaces where words often failed. Her parents could not afford the grand instruments or the formal lessons that some children her age enjoyed, but that never stopped her. She found ways to practice, using second-hand keyboards, tapping on tabletops, or even tracing the keys in the air with her fingers to memorize each note. Her world revolved around melodies and harmonies, and she was determined to make music her life. Every morning, she would wake before the sun, her small fingers brushing over the worn keys of the keyboard, producing a mix of imperfect sounds that gradually formed into something beautiful. Sometimes, she would play until her hands ached, ignoring the fatigue because each note brought her closer to the feeling she was chasing. A pure, unbroken connection to the music inside her. Her neighbors often heard her practicing late into the night, and some would stop and listen through the cracks of their doors and windows. They saw the spark in her eyes and the intensity in her movements, but they didn't understand the depth of her commitment. Many thought it was just a hobby, a phase, or a child's fleeting interest. But she knew better. School was another challenge altogether. She was bright, but she often felt out of place among her classmates. While others talked about games, social media, or weekend plans, she would hum a melody in her mind, imagining rhythms and chord progressions that she could bring to life on her instrument. Some children teased her for always carrying her music books, calling her strange or saying she was wasting her time. Their laughter sometimes stung, but it also hardened her resolve. She realized that the world might not always understand her passion, and that was okay. The music was hers, and it was powerful in ways words could never be. Her first piano teacher had noticed her unique gift. Though the lessons were simple and infrequent, the teacher recognized the raw talent that existed within her. She had a natural sense of rhythm, an ability to hear complex melodies and replicate them almost instantly. It wasn't just technical skill. She played with emotion that could draw listeners in, making them feel something they hadn't expected. But her path was not easy. Every lesson required dedication, patience, and resilience, especially when her family struggled to afford the small fees and the occasional sheet of music. Each note she learned was earned. Each chord remembered was a small victory. As she grew older, her skills became more refined. She began performing in small local events, school concerts, and neighborhood gatherings. Each performance was a mix of nerves and excitement, and she learned early on how to cope with stage fright. Despite her talent, not everyone welcomed her music with open arms. Some audiences would whisper, point, or giggle, dismissing her efforts as amateurish. These moments were painful, but she refused to let them define her. Instead, she focused on the moments of genuine connection. When someone's eyes lit up, when a hand clapped a little longer than expected, or when a listener wiped away a tear during a particularly moving piece. Those reactions reminded her why she persisted. Her family, while proud, were cautious. They worried about her dreams, knowing that the path of a musician was filled with uncertainty and hardship. They encouraged her to continue but often suggested she keep her studies or consider a more stable career. She listened, appreciated their concern, but could not imagine a life without music. It was not just a dream, it was the essence of who she was. She spent hours imagining herself on grand stages, feeling the energy of a captivated audience, and letting her music tell stories that words could not. Practicing alone was her sanctuary. In those quiet moments, she could pour her soul into every note, shaping the music with her emotions, letting joy, sadness, and hope flow through her fingers. She would often play the same piece repeatedly, searching for perfection, not in a technical sense, but in the way it touched hearts. There were times when frustration threatened to take over, when a melody refused to come out as she imagined, when her fingers stumbled, or when her mind felt scattered. But she learned to embrace these moments, understanding that persistence was as much a part of her growth as talent itself. Outside of her music, she was like any other young person, navigating friendships, schoolwork, and the little dramas of growing up. Yet, music remained her anchor. When life felt heavy, she would retreat to her piano, letting the notes guide her through uncertainty. The world of sound was honest in a way people often were not. Each key she pressed responded with precision and emotion, reflecting her inner state back to her. Through music, she found a voice that no one could dismiss. Her first big opportunity arrived unexpectedly. A local music competition was announced, offering young talents a chance to perform in front of a larger audience. She hesitated at first, worried about the scrutiny, about the possibility of failure, but ultimately, she knew this was the step she had been preparing for all her life. For weeks, she practiced relentlessly, refining her pieces, experimenting with dynamics, tempo, and expression. She imagined the audience, their reactions, and the impact her music could have if played from the heart. The day of the competition arrived, and she felt a mix of fear and excitement. As she walked into the hall, she noticed other participants, some with polished appearances, expensive instruments, and confident demeanors. She felt a pang of doubt but quickly reminded herself of the countless hours she had dedicated to this moment. She had faced ridicule and skepticism before, and those experiences had only strengthened her. She carried her own sense of purpose onto the stage, letting the music be her shield and her message. As she sat at the piano, the lights dimmed, and the audience quieted. She felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. The first note rang out, imperfect yet sincere, capturing attention in its honesty. The second note followed, smoother this time, flowing naturally into the melody she had practiced so many times. She closed her eyes, letting her fingers move instinctively, trusting the countless hours of preparation. In that moment, she was not just performing. She was sharing her life, her struggles, and her passion with everyone present. Each note carried her story, a story of persistence, hope, and unwavering dedication. The performance was not without its challenges. A small misstep here, a hesitant chord there, but she did not falter. She allowed the imperfections to add character, to make the music more human and relatable. The audience leaned in, sensing the authenticity of her expression. Some watched quietly, their eyes fixed on her movements, while others felt the stirrings of emotion they could not contain. She played not for applause or recognition but because she had to, because music was an inseparable part of her being. When the last note resonated through the hall, a hush filled the room. It was a silence charged with emotion, the kind that makes people hold their breath, unsure how to respond. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the audience. Some clapped hesitantly, others with full enthusiasm, and a few wiped their eyes discreetly. For her, it was a moment of quiet triumph, the first tangible recognition that her dedication had meaning. It was not about winning a prize, but about standing firm in her passion and touching the hearts of those who listened. Walking off the stage, she felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The whispers, glances, and judgments that had once threatened to shake her confidence now seemed distant. She realized that the path she had chosen was not easy, but every challenge had prepared her for moments like this. Her love for music had carried her through doubt, mockery, and fear, shaping her into a musician who played not just with skill, but with soul. And as she left the hall that day, she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose, ready for the next stage, the next audience, and the next opportunity to let her music speak for itself. The anticipation was like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest as she stepped into the grand hall. The bright lights reflected off the polished floors, making the room feel both magnificent and intimidating. She could see rows of seats filled with spectators, judges, and critics, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. The atmosphere was thick with expectation, and she felt every eye on her as she carried herself toward the piano. It was not just a performance. It was a test of everything she had worked for, a moment where her talent would meet judgment. She took a deep breath and seated herself at the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a brief moment, almost trembling, but she pushed the fear aside. Memories of years of practice and sacrifice flashed through her mind. The early mornings, the late nights, the hours spent perfecting each note. She reminded herself that this was her strength, her voice, and no amount of criticism could take that away. Still, the murmurs from the audience were hard to ignore. Some whispered about her appearance, others about her age, and a few even snickered at the idea of her competing among more experienced musicians. The mocking words cut like invisible blades, but she tried to focus on the music that had always been her refuge. The judges sat with their pens poised, ready to make notes about her technique and style. She knew that to them, every movement would be scrutinized, every note measured against technical perfection rather than emotion. Her heart raced as she recalled the stories of past competitors who had faltered under such pressure. She felt a flicker of doubt, wondering if her music would be enough to command respect, or if it would be dismissed as mere talent without depth. Yet, within her, there was a small flame of determination, a quiet voice reminding her that this was her moment to shine. The first few seconds of her performance were cautious. Her fingers moved deliberately, testing the waters, feeling the resonance of the piano beneath her hands. Some in the audience exchanged doubtful glances, their expressions betraying their expectations of failure. She could sense the mocking energy in the room, the subtle smirks, and the whispers that sought to undermine her. It was a heavy atmosphere, but she chose not to dwell on it. Instead, she let the music guide her, allowing her emotions to seep into each note. As the piece progressed, her initial hesitancy gave way to confidence. She remembered the countless times she had practiced in solitude, imagining herself performing for a perfect audience that truly understood her music. Those moments alone had prepared her for this, and now she could channel every ounce of that experience into the keys beneath her fingers. Her music began to fill the hall with emotion, the notes rising and falling like waves, carrying with them the story of her struggles, her passion, and her resilience. But the mocking continued, subtle yet persistent. A few audience members whispered among themselves, casting sideways glances and shaking their heads. Some of the younger attendees giggled, unsure of what they were witnessing, and the critics in the front row scribbled notes, their expressions unreadable. It would have been easy to let these reactions disrupt her performance, to allow self-doubt to creep back in. Yet, she had learned long ago that the world's opinions could not dictate her worth. Music was her truth, and she was determined to let it speak louder than any voice of ridicule. Midway through her performance, a shift began to occur. The audience that had been skeptical started to pay closer attention. The subtle changes in her tempo, the gentle crescendos, and the emotional phrasing caught some off guard. There was something raw and authentic about the way she played, a vulnerability that demanded recognition. People began to sit a little straighter, eyes widening as they realized that this was not just a technical display, but a story told through sound. The whispers faded, replaced by an almost palpable tension as everyone waited to see where the music would lead. She could feel the connection forming, the invisible thread linking her heart to the audience. The same people who had mocked her moments ago were now leaning forward, captivated by the depth of feeling in her playing. Every note seemed to resonate with something deep within them, stirring emotions they had not expected to encounter. It was a transformative moment, both for her and for those listening. The music had become a bridge between her inner world and the outer one, a language that transcended judgment and criticism. Yet, the pressure did not disappear entirely. The judges still watched closely, their pens moving across their sheets, capturing technical points, finger placement, and timing. She knew that this was part of the challenge, the reality of performing in a competitive setting. But she refused to let the analysis overshadow the performance. She played with heart, allowing the imperfections to become part of the story. Each hesitation, each delicate pause, added authenticity to the music, demonstrating that real emotion was more powerful than mechanical perfection. Her mind briefly flickered to the critics who had doubted her from the start. She remembered the harsh comments, the sneers, and the dismissive gestures. But instead of feeling defeated, she transformed that energy into fuel. Each chord she struck was a statement, a quiet defiance against those who had mocked her. Music, she realized, had the power to silence ridicule without uttering a single word. Her fingers danced across the keys, weaving a tapestry of sound that was both personal and universal, a declaration that talent and passion could not be diminished by scorn. By the final notes of the piece, the atmosphere in the hall had completely changed. The skepticism, the mockery, and the doubts were replaced by awe and respect. Some audience members were visibly moved, their expressions softened, tears glinting in the eyes of those who had been least expecting to feel anything. The critics, who had prepared to scrutinize every detail, paused, caught off guard by the emotional impact of her performance. She had done more than play notes. She had told a story, and it had reached the hearts of everyone present. As she lifted her hands from the keys, a silence fell over the room, almost reverent in its intensity. It was a moment of transition, a space where the audience absorbed the full weight of what they had just witnessed. The mocking that had been so palpable at the beginning of her performance now seemed distant and irrelevant. She had faced ridicule, uncertainty, and fear, and through it all, she had remained true to her music. The sound of applause began slowly, tentative at first, then building into a wave of appreciation that filled the hall with warmth and energy. It was a triumph not just of skill, but of courage and resilience. Walking off the stage, she felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The experience had been more than a performance. It had been a confrontation with doubt and mockery, and she had emerged stronger for it. She realized that the power of music lay not in the approval of others, but in the ability to touch hearts and express the truth within. Every challenge she had faced, every discouraging comment, had prepared her for this moment. She had learned that ridicule could be transformed into motivation, and that the voice of her music was stronger than any criticism. Later, as she reflected on the performance, she understood that the mockery she had encountered was part of her journey. It had tested her resolve, sharpened her focus, and forced her to rely on her inner strength. She knew that more challenges would come, more skeptics and critics would attempt to undermine her, but she also knew that she had the power to rise above them. Music had given her a voice that could not be silenced, a means to express her identity and emotions in ways words often failed. The hall emptied, leaving her alone with the echo of the final notes lingering in the air. She ran her fingers over the piano keys once more, feeling the resonance beneath her touch. The experience had changed her in subtle ways, deepening her connection to her art and strengthening her confidence. She understood that every performance was not just about technical skill, but about conveying the essence of who she was. And in that understanding, she found a sense of peace, knowing that she could face any audience, any challenge, and any criticism with courage and grace. Her journey was only beginning, and the lessons of this day would guide her through the many performances to come. After the initial wave of fear and skepticism, she sat alone in the quiet of her practice room, reflecting on what had just happened. The memory of the audience's smirks and whispers still lingered, but so did the tiny moments of recognition that had begun to break through the mockery. She knew that to truly make an impact, she needed more than technical skill. She needed to touch something deep within her listeners, something beyond mere notes and rhythm. This realization pushed her to look inward, to explore the music that resonated most with her soul, and to prepare for the performance that would define her. She spent hours going over her repertoire, searching for a piece that could convey her emotions fully. It was not enough to choose a popular composition. She needed a song that would tell her story, one that reflected the struggles, hope, and resilience she had cultivated over the years. Every melody she played stirred memories of the quiet nights she practiced alone, of the ridicule she endured, and of the fleeting moments when someone recognized the passion in her music. Each note held meaning. Each chord carried a piece of her journey. She knew that the right song could transform the energy in the room, turning doubt and mockery into respect and admiration. Her decision was deliberate. She chose a piece that was challenging yet deeply expressive, one that demanded both technical precision and emotional vulnerability. As she practiced, she focused not only on hitting the right keys but on shaping the story within the music. She imagined herself on the stage, feeling the pulse of the audience, and letting the melodies flow naturally from her fingertips. The process was exhausting but invigorating, as each repetition strengthened her confidence and deepened her connection to the piece. She began to understand that music was not just about performance. It was about communication, about conveying what words could never capture. As the day of her next performance approached, nerves and excitement intertwined. She felt the familiar tension in her stomach, the awareness of eyes watching, judging, and waiting for a mistake. Yet, she also felt a growing sense of purpose. This was her chance to rise above the doubts, to show that her music could speak louder than any criticism. She visualized herself at the piano, fingers poised over the keys, heart open to the music, and the audience ready to hear her truth. The thought grounded her, transforming fear into focus. When she arrived at the venue, the grandeur of the hall struck her again. But this time it felt less intimidating and more like an arena where she could express herself fully. The audience was present, as were the critics, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some recognized her from previous performances and exchanged glances, whispering among themselves about her potential. The mockery she had faced before lingered in the air, but she chose to ignore it, centering herself in the music that had become her lifeline. She reminded herself that the audience's perceptions could not define her. Only the honesty and emotion of her playing could. Seated at the piano, she paused to center herself, feeling the cool touch of the keys under her fingers. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let herself breathe, listening to the quiet hum of the hall. She thought of every late-night practice, every moment of doubt, and every small victory along her journey. With each memory, she felt a surge of determination. She knew that once her fingers touched the keys, there would be no turning back. The first note would signal more than a performance. It would be a declaration of courage and authenticity. As the first note sounded, there was a tangible shift in the room. The audience, curious and skeptical at first, leaned in. The melody flowed smoothly, carrying both technical precision and deep emotion. She played with intention, each chord a statement, each phrase a reflection of her inner world. The music was alive, breathing through her fingers, filling the space with energy that demanded attention. Some listeners began to quiet, their earlier smirks replaced by intrigue, their whispers fading into focused silence. The power of the music was undeniable, and it started to change the room. She felt a sense of liberation as she continued to play. The notes carried her story, the struggles of her early life, the nights of relentless practice, the moments of ridicule she had endured, and the small triumphs that had kept her going. Every nuance was deliberate, yet organic, a reflection of her authenticity. Her body moved in harmony with the music, leaning into the keys, swaying slightly with the rhythm, completely absorbed in the act of creation. She realized that this was the essence of performance, losing oneself in the music so completely that the audience cannot help but feel it as well. Gradually, the atmosphere began to transform. The skeptics were caught off guard, their doubts eroding with each phrase she played. The critics, who had come to analyze and judge, were now listening with an intensity that surprised even them. The piece demanded attention, and they could not ignore the depth and emotion she poured into it. Some audience members, moved by the vulnerability and passion in her playing, felt their hearts stir in unexpected ways. A few leaned forward, unable to resist the pull of the music, as though it were speaking directly to them, bypassing thought and touching something primal and profound. She noticed the subtle changes around her, but she did not let them distract her. Her focus remained on the music, on the story she was telling through the keys. She understood that the audience's reaction was a reflection of her authenticity, not a product of approval-seeking. Each crescendo, each delicate passage, each moment of silence was carefully shaped to convey the emotional arc she intended. The room became a shared space, a place where the music allowed people to connect without words, where her story became their story for a fleeting, powerful moment. As the piece reached its climax, she felt a surge of emotion herself. The technical challenges she had mastered were no longer a focus. The music had become an extension of her soul. She let herself play freely, allowing the passion and intensity she had held back for so long to emerge fully. The audience was silent now, hanging on every note, caught in the spell she had woven. The mockery and doubt that had shadowed her previous performances were gone, replaced by a growing sense of admiration and awe. The music was no longer just sound. It was an experience, a shared journey that transcended words and judgments. The final notes resonated through the hall, lingering in the air like a soft echo of the emotions she had poured into them. A profound silence followed, heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. Then, gradually, applause began to build, tentative at first, then swelling into a chorus of appreciation. The clapping, once hesitant and uncertain, now rang with genuine admiration, filling the room with energy and warmth. Some audience members wiped away tears, others exchanged amazed glances, and even the critics seemed momentarily speechless. The impact of her performance had transcended expectation and judgment, reaching into the hearts of those present. As she rose from the piano, a sense of fulfillment washed over her. She had faced the lingering doubts, the whispers of ridicule, and the weight of skepticism, and she had emerged not only victorious in her performance but transformed by the experience. The music had become her voice, stronger than ever, and it had spoken clearly to everyone in the room. She understood that this was only a step on her journey, that there would be future performances, challenges, and audiences to face, but she also knew that her ability to connect through music was now undeniable. Later, in the quiet moments after the performance, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The ridicule, the long hours of practice, the sacrifices, and the doubts were all part of the story she now shared with the world. The piece she had chosen was not merely a composition. It was an expression of resilience, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of passion. She realized that every note played from the heart had the power to transform skepticism into respect, to convert doubt into understanding, and to turn mockery into admiration. She had learned that the true measure of a musician was not in technical skill alone, but in the ability to touch souls and convey authenticity. The experience left her with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that music was not just her talent. It was her calling, a force that could inspire, heal, and connect people in ways nothing else could. She felt grateful for the challenges she had faced, understanding that they had prepared her to reach this moment of clarity and triumph. Her journey was far from over, but the lesson was clear. By embracing authenticity and expressing herself fully, she could overcome any skepticism and make a lasting impact through her art. The day of the performance arrived with a sense of quiet intensity. The hall was alive with the chatter of people finding their seats, the shuffle of programs, and the faint hum of anticipation that always precedes something extraordinary. She stood backstage, taking a moment to breathe, to center herself, and to remember why she had chosen this path. Every struggle, every late-night practice, and every whisper of doubt had led her here. She felt the familiar flutter in her stomach, a mix of excitement and nervousness, but it was accompanied by a growing confidence that she had earned through years of dedication. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano with steady steps, feeling the polished wood under her fingers as she seated herself. The lights above cast a soft glow, illuminating the keys and reflecting in the attentive eyes of the audience. There were critics, music lovers, and casual listeners, all with their own expectations and judgments. She sensed some skepticism, some lingering doubt from those who had come to see if she would falter again. But she also felt the potential for connection, the chance to reach hearts through something that went beyond performance and technique. Her first note echoed through the hall, pure and resonant. It was the opening of the piece she had chosen, one that carried her personal story and emotional journey. As she played, her fingers moved with a fluidity and grace that spoke of countless hours of practice, but also of a deep understanding of the music itself. Each chord and each phrase was imbued with feeling, a reflection of her determination, resilience, and passion. The audience listened, some leaning forward instinctively, drawn in by the authenticity of her expression. As the piece unfolded, the subtle tension in the room began to change. Those who had expected another display of technical skill without depth began to realize that something different was happening. Her music was not just sound. It was a narrative, a living story that unfolded with each note. The mockery that had haunted her earlier performances seemed to fade, replaced by a growing sense of curiosity and wonder. People who had whispered and scoffed before were now silent, captivated by the emotional resonance of her playing. She felt herself becoming fully immersed in the performance, letting go of any fear or self-consciousness. The piano became an extension of her being, her emotions flowing directly through her hands. Every rise and fall of the melody mirrored her inner journey, and she could sense the audience responding, even if subtly at first. There were small shifts, a held breath here, a quiet sigh there, eyes widening with surprise or admiration. The music created a shared experience, bridging the gap between her world and that of the listeners. The critics, too, found themselves affected. They had prepared to evaluate her technique and style with detached precision, but the depth of her performance challenged them to reconsider. Her music was honest, unpretentious, and compelling, and it demanded recognition. Each phrase was carefully crafted, not to impress with complexity alone, but to communicate emotion and truth. The imperfections that might have been seen as flaws were instead aspects of her humanity, making the performance relatable and profoundly moving. Midway through the piece, a noticeable change swept over the hall. The skeptics were no longer skeptical, and the whispers had vanished entirely. Instead, there was a collective attention, a shared understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The energy shifted from doubt to engagement, from expectation to genuine curiosity about where the music would lead. She felt a thrill of connection, knowing that her choices, her courage, and her dedication had created this transformation. The music itself was guiding the audience, leading them into a space where they could feel and experience alongside her. Her fingers danced across the keys W, with increasing confidence. The technical mastery was evident, but it was the emotion behind each note that truly captured attention. She allowed herself to play freely, to explore the dynamics of the piece, and to let the nuances emerge naturally. There was joy, sorrow, hope, and a quiet strength that carried through every passage. The audience was visibly affected. Some had tears glistening in their eyes, others had their heads tilted slightly, completely absorbed. The atmosphere was electric yet intimate, a rare combination that only comes from a performer willing to bare their soul through music. She noticed a few familiar faces in the crowd, people who had doubted her abilities, who had whispered or laughed during previous performances. Their expressions had changed. There was admiration now, a recognition of the effort and talent that they had once dismissed. She did not play for revenge or validation, but there was an undeniable satisfaction in seeing how music could transform perception, how authenticity and dedication could break through prejudice and doubt. She realized that the most powerful impact came not from proving others wrong, but from letting the music speak the truth of her heart. As she approached the climax of the piece, the tension and emotion reached their peak. Her movements became more expressive, the dynamics more dramatic, yet still controlled and precise. The hall seemed to hold its breath with her, every listener drawn into the story unfolding through her fingers. She felt a profound sense of unity with the audience, a recognition that music had the ability to connect people in a way that transcended words. The journey of the piece mirrored her own journey, from doubt to courage, from struggle to triumph, and from isolation to connection. The final notes lingered in the air, resonant and full of meaning. A hush fell over the hall, as if the audience collectively acknowledged the weight of what they had just experienced. It was a moment of reflection, a pause where the impact of the performance could be fully absorbed. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, at first gentle and hesitant, then building into a wave of genuine admiration and appreciation. The sound filled the hall, warm and powerful, and she felt it wash over her, a tangible acknowledgement of the emotional journey she had shared. The critics were no longer detached observers. Some were visibly moved, their pens paused mid-note as they processed the depth of the performance. Audience members who had arrived with doubt were now celebrating the music, some whispering to each other, some leaning back in astonishment. The mockery that had once seemed inevitable had been replaced by respect and awe. The music had spoken louder than any words, conveying emotion, authenticity, and and courage in a way that transcended judgment. She rose from the piano, her hands trembling slightly with the release of energy and emotion. The applause continued, echoing around the hall, affirming that her performance had reached its mark. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had shared not only her talent but her story and her heart. The experience was transformative, both for herself and for those who had witnessed it. She understood that the power of music lay not just in technical skill, but in the ability to convey emotion, to connect, and to inspire. After leaving the stage, she reflected on the journey that had led her here. The hours of practice, the ridicule, the doubt, and the perseverance had all culminated in this moment of triumph. She realized that every challenge she had faced was part of the process, shaping her into a musician capable of touching hearts and commanding attention through sincerity and passion. The experience reinforced her belief that music could break barriers, alter perceptions, and create a shared understanding among people from all walks of life. She also recognized the personal growth she had achieved. The performance was not only about proving her ability to others, but also about discovering her own strength and resilience. She had faced fear and skepticism head-on, relied on her dedication and authenticity, and emerged with a renewed sense of confidence. The impact of the performance extended beyond the applause. It had validated the journey, the effort, and the commitment that defined her relationship with music. In the quiet moments after the event, as the audience filed out and the hall emptied, she sat alone at the piano, letting her fingers trace the keys gently. She reflected on the emotions of the day, the transformation of doubt into admiration, and the power of music to communicate beyond words. The experience reinforced her understanding that every performance was an opportunity to connect, to express, and to inspire. She knew that this was only one of many stages she would face, but the lessons of this day would remain with her forever. The applause, the changed expressions of the audience, and the newfound respect from critics were tangible rewards, but the true victory lay in her understanding of the music itself and her ability to share it authentically. She had learned that courage, passion, and persistence could overcome doubt and mockery, and that the voice of her music was stronger than any criticism. As she left the hall, she carried with her a sense of accomplishment, purpose, and a deep connection to the art that had defined her life. The journey continued, but she now knew the power of music to transform, uplift, and unite hearts in ways nothing else could. The applause that followed her performance echoed in her ears long after she had left the stage. She walked through the hall, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Every step was light, almost floating, because she had poured everything into the music and it had reached the audience in a way she had only dreamed of. The faces in the crowd that had once expressed doubt or ridicule now reflected admiration and surprise. Some smiled, some nodded in respect, and a few even whispered among themselves, clearly moved by the emotion her playing had conveyed. She realized that this was more than a performance. It was a moment of connection that had transcended expectation and judgment. Backstage, a few people approached her to express their appreciation. One person spoke softly, almost reverently, about how the music had touched them deeply. Another shared that they had felt a personal story within the performance, a reflection of struggle, hope, and triumph. Even the critics, known for their detached demeanor, acknowledged the sincerity and emotion of her playing. These reactions filled her with a quiet joy, not because of recognition, but because she had succeeded in doing what she had always wanted: to make people feel, to communicate beyond words, and to share a piece of herself through music. She found a quiet corner to sit and reflect on the journey that had brought her here. From the earliest days of practice on an old, worn keyboard, to the long nights of repetition, and the many times she had faced skepticism and ridicule, each moment had contributed to the person she had become. The challenges had not deterred her. They had shaped her, strengthened her, and taught her the value of perseverance. She understood that the moments of doubt, the whispers of mockery, and the occasional loneliness had been as much a part of her growth as the hours of practice and the small victories along the way. As she replayed the performance in her mind, she thought about the specific moments where the music had reached the audience, the delicate passages where she had allowed vulnerability to show, the powerful crescendos that expressed determination, and the subtle pauses that created anticipation. All these elements had created a journey that mirrored her own life. Music, she realized, was not just about notes on a page or technical skill. It was about storytelling, about capturing emotion and communicating it so others could understand, feel, and even relate to it. The impact of this performance went beyond the immediate applause. Invitations to perform in other venues began to arrive, each one an opportunity to reach more people and share her music further. She received letters and messages from people she did not know, expressing how her playing had inspired them, comforted them, or given them hope. These responses reminded her that the influence of music could extend far beyond a single hall or a single performance. It had the power to connect strangers, heal hearts, and bring joy and solace to those who encountered it. This realization strengthened her resolve to continue pursuing her passion with unwavering dedication. At home, she took a moment to unwind, placing her hands gently on her own piano. The keys felt familiar, comforting, and alive beneath her fingers. She played softly, not for an audience, not for recognition, but for herself, for the pure love of the music. The melodies flowed naturally, carrying both reflection and anticipation. As she considered the future, she understood that every performance would come with its own challenges, doubts, and moments of fear. But the rewards, the connection, the joy, and the sense of purpose were worth every effort. Music had become her language, her sanctuary, and her identity. Her family, who had supported her in their quiet way, noticed the change in her. They had watched her grow from a young girl with a passion for sound into a musician capable of touching hearts. Their pride was evident, and they expressed it not just in words but in the subtle ways they encouraged her, in the quiet approval that meant more than any loud praise. They recognized that the journey had not been easy, and their support, though sometimes cautious, had provided a foundation for her persistence and growth. The realization that she could both follow her passion and inspire those around her filled her with gratitude. Even as recognition grew, she remained humble and grounded. She understood that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, authenticity, and the willingness to express oneself fully were essential. She continued to practice diligently, exploring new pieces, experimenting with expression, and refining her craft. Each day brought a new opportunity to deepen her connection to the music and to herself. She embraced these moments, recognizing that the journey of a musician was continuous, evolving, and filled with endless possibilities. She also began to reflect on the lessons learned from the mockery and doubt she had faced. Rather than allowing negativity to discourage her, she had used it as motivation to grow stronger, to focus more intensely, and to prove through action rather than words what she was capable of. The experience taught her resilience, patience, and the importance of trusting her own instincts. She realized that the opinions of others could never define her worth or her talent. Only her dedication, honesty, and courage could do that. This insight became a guiding principle in both her musical journey and her life. As she looked ahead, she envisioned new stages, larger audiences, and opportunities to share her music with people who had yet to hear it. The thought of touching more hearts, inspiring more individuals, and creating moments of shared emotion filled her with excitement. She understood that the path ahead would not always be easy, that challenges and critics would continue to exist, but she felt prepared to face them with the same determination and authenticity that had brought her this far. The power of music, she realized, was limitless, and her role was to continue sharing it with courage and sincerity. Through all these reflections, she remained grounded in the joy and love that music brought her. She recognized that it was not just about accolades, recognition, or applause. It was about the ability to express herself, to connect with others, and to create something meaningful and lasting. Each note played, each phrase shaped, and each performance offered a chance to touch hearts and communicate beyond words. This understanding deepened her commitment and fueled her passion, reminding her why she had chosen this path in the first place. The experience of being mocked, challenged, and ultimately recognized had transformed her perspective. She realized that obstacles and criticism were not hindrances but opportunities for growth, for reflection, and for demonstrating the power of perseverance. The journey had taught her to trust in her abilities, to value the authenticity of her expression, and to embrace the vulnerability that made her music resonate so profoundly with others. She understood that true success was measured not only by external validation but by the courage to remain true to oneself and to pursue one's passion relentlessly. In quiet moments, she often returned to her practice space, allowing the music to flow freely without expectation or pressure. These sessions became a sanctuary, a place where she could reflect, experiment, and connect with the essence of her art. She played pieces that challenged her, compositions that inspired her, and melodies that spoke to her soul. Through these experiences, she continued to grow as a musician and as a person, deepening her understanding of the profound impact music could have on herself and others. Looking back on the journey, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The challenges she had faced, the ridicule she had endured, and the moments of doubt had all contributed to her growth and resilience. The applause, recognition, and admiration she received were meaningful, but the true reward lay in the realization that she had remained authentic, dedicated, and courageous throughout. Music had allowed her to tell her story, connect with others, and find her own voice in a world that often sought to dismiss it. As she prepared for future performances, she carried with her the lessons of this journey. She knew that each audience, each stage, and each performance would present new challenges and opportunities. Yet, armed with experience, confidence, and a deep love for her art, she felt ready to face them all. Her music would continue to evolve, reaching more people, inspiring more hearts, and conveying the emotions and truths that could not be captured in words alone. The journey was ongoing, but the triumphs and lessons of this moment would guide her forever. The story of her performance, the transformation of mockery into admiration, and the power of her music became an enduring testament to the strength of passion, perseverance, and authenticity. She understood that every note played, every melody shared, and every emotion expressed was part of a larger journey, one that would continue to unfold as long as she remained true to herself and her art. Music had given her a voice, a purpose, and a means to touch the hearts of countless individuals, and she embraced this responsibility with humility, dedication, and unwavering courage. Ultimately, she realized that her journey was not just about being recognized or praised. It was about the ability to connect, inspire, and convey the depth of human emotion through music. The experience of overcoming doubt, mockery, and skepticism had strengthened her resolve and taught her the profound impact of authenticity and courage. She understood that every challenge faced, every note played with sincerity, and every performance offered an opportunity to create a meaningful and lasting impression. With this understanding, she moved forward, ready to continue her journey, share her music, and leave an enduring mark on the hearts of those who listened.